Working the night shift in the basement of an underfunded government hospital is an inherently unsettling experience. The flickering fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of bleach, and the long, empty corridors are enough to put anyone on edge. For a young, skeptical college student completing his mandatory medical service, a single night shift as a medical examiner's assistant shattered his disbelief in the paranormal forever. He had no prior experience working around the deceased. Older colleagues had warned him that strange, unexplainable things happened in the morgue at night, advising him to simply ignore the noises and focus on his job. Being a rational thinker, he brushed their warnings off as cheap attempts to scare the new guy. Around 3 a.m., the attending doctor asked him to walk down to the cold room to do a physical head count of the bodies stored there. The young assistant walked down the long, dimly lit hallway. Several overhead bulbs were burnt out, plunging sections of the corridor into deep shadows. He unlocked the heavy metal door of the cold room and stepped inside. The air was freezing. He began walking down the aisle of stainless steel tables, mentally counting the figures resting beneath the heavy white sheets. As he reached the middle of the room, he caught a subtle, terrifying movement out of the corner of his eye. One of the bodies, entirely covered by a blanket, seemed to have shifted. More specifically, the lump beneath the sheet that indicated the corpse's head had slowly turned. His heart began to hammer violently against his ribs. Trying to convince himself it was just a trick of the light or his own paranoia, he took a deep breath, walked directly up to the stainless steel table, and slowly pulled the white sheet back. His blood ran completely cold. The deceased man's head was no longer facing the ceiling. The stiff, lifeless neck was twisted awkwardly to the side, and the dead man's dull, gray eyes were pointing directly at the exact spot where the assistant had been standing just moments before. A freezing chill washed over his entire body. Panicking, but trying to maintain his professionalism, he quickly pulled the sheet back over the man's face, turned his back, and frantically tried to finish his count. The room was dead silent. Then, cutting through the hum of the refrigeration units, a loud, agonizing, and heartbreaking male cry echoed directly from the covered corpse behind him. The assistant didn't turn around. He didn't investigate. He bolted for the heavy metal doors, sprinting blindly down the dark hallway as fast as his legs could carry him. He burst into the doctor's office, pale, hyperventilating, and completely unable to speak. The older doctor didn't ask what happened. He simply looked at the terrified young man with a grim, knowing expression that silently confirmed one horrifying truth. He knew exactly what was in that room. The assistant begged for the morning to come, forever traumatized by the cry of a dead man. For a veteran forensic pathologist, the sight of a deceased body is just another day at the office. Arturo had been a forensic doctor for 10 years. He had seen every type of tragic demise imaginable and had long lost any sense of fear regarding the dead. But a night shift at a new county morgue changed his perspective entirely. Arturo was working the late shift with a rookie colleague. Around 1 a.m., the transport team brought in the heavily decomposed body of an elderly woman. The crew explained that she was a deeply isolated recluse. No family, no friends. Her neighbors had only discovered her passing due to the overwhelming foul odor leaking from her home. Arturo and his young colleague completed the autopsy in silence. They transferred the old woman's remains into the cold storage room, sliding her tray in, closing the heavy metal door, and securing the heavy steel padlock. They retreated to the break room for coffee. Almost immediately, the atmosphere in the morgue shifted. The air grew incredibly heavy, thick with a suffocating, distressing energy. Both men felt physically nauseous. As they sat in silence, the distinct, agonizingly loud creak of a heavy metal hinge echoed from down the hall. It came from the cold room. The two men exchanged terrified glances. Arturo led the way down the hall. When they stepped into the refrigeration room, Arturo stopped dead in his tracks. Out of all the storage lockers, only one door was standing wide open. It was the old woman's locker. The heavy steel padlock had been completely removed. Arturo's colleague nervously asked if he had forgotten to lock it. Arturo lied to calm the rookie down, saying the latch must be broken. He closed the door, locked it again, and they returned to their duties. An hour later, Arturo heard his colleague scream his name from the employee restroom. Arturo rushed in. The young doctor was pressed against the far wall, staring in absolute terror at the large mirror above the sinks. He hysterically claimed that while washing his hands, he had seen the reflection of the dead old woman standing right in the open doorway behind him, staring at him with her one bruised black eye. Arturo sent the terrified rookie to rest in the break room, trying to rationalize the situation. But 30 minutes later, the fluorescent lights in the autopsy bay began to flicker violently before completely dying, plunging the morgue into pitch blackness. Arturo pulled out his phone flashlight and walked out into the main hallway to check the fuse box. As he turned the corner, his flashlight beam illuminated a horrifying sight. Sitting upright on a metal transport stretcher in the middle of the dark hallway was the dead old woman. She wasn't moving. She was just sitting there in the dark, her dead eyes locked onto Arturo. Then, from her decaying lips, a sinister, echoing, raspy laugh filled the dark corridor. Arturo turned and ran for his life. The lights violently flickered back on. When he looked back, the hallway was completely empty. Arturo immediately called the head doctor of the facility, refusing to step back inside. The next day, the head doctor investigated the woman's background. Her neighbors revealed a terrifying truth. The old woman was a feared local practitioner of black magic. She was known to torture animals, conduct dark rituals, and even attempted to abduct a young child from the street. People believed she had made a literal pact with demonic entities, selling her soul for dark power. Terrified of the malicious energy clinging to her remains, the doctors immediately had the woman cremated, ensuring her cursed spirit had no physical vessel to return to. The dark atmosphere instantly vanished from the morgue, but Arturo never forgot the chilling laugh of the town witch. The morgue is a place of finality, but sometimes victims of sudden, tragic accidents are violently torn from life before they can process their own demise. Fatima, an experienced forensic doctor, believes that these confused souls often wander the halls, unaware that they have crossed over. One night, Fatima was the only medical professional on duty. Her only company was an older security guard stationed at the front desk. At 2 a.m., paramedics rolled in a body bag containing an 18-year-old girl who had been the victim of a brutal hit and run. After the medics left, Fatima performed the standard intake. The young girl had suffered massive, catastrophic injuries. It was a tragic, heartbreaking sight. Fatima left the autopsy bay to ask the front desk guard if anyone had called to claim the body. The guard wasn't at his desk, but Fatima could hear him talking to someone in the lobby. Assuming a grieving family member had arrived, she hurried to wash her hands. When she stepped into the waiting room, the guard was entirely alone. Fatima asked who he had been speaking to. The guard looked sympathetic. He explained that a young girl had just wandered into the lobby, looking completely disoriented. The girl had told the guard she was lost and just wanted someone to help her get a taxi so she could go home. Bound by protocol, the guard couldn't leave his post, but he pointed her toward the main road before she wandered back out the front doors. Fatima shrugged it off as a confused teenager wandering the streets at night and returned to the autopsy bay to prepare the other remains. As she was working, a deafening, sickening thud echoed from the adjacent room. Fatima rushed into the room. The body of the 18-year-old hit-and-run victim had somehow fallen completely off the heavy steel stretcher and crashed onto the hard tile floor. It was a physical impossibility. A deceased human body is incredibly heavy, and there was absolutely nothing in the room that could have pushed her off the table. Spooked and unable to lift the dead weight alone, Fatima ran to the lobby and asked the security guard for help. The guard followed her into the autopsy room, but as he stepped through the door and looked down at the lifeless, bruised face of the 18-year-old girl on the floor, the color completely drained from his face. He froze, completely speechless, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "What's wrong?" Fatima asked, her voice trembling. The guard pointed a shaking finger at the corpse. That's the girl," he stammered. "That's the girl who just came into the lobby asking for a ride home." Fatima's blood ran cold. She asked if he was absolutely sure. The guard nodded frantically, pointing to a distinct, unique tattoo on the dead girl's right arm. He had noticed the exact same ink on the lost girl in the lobby just 15 minutes prior. Together they lifted the heavy remains back onto the steel table in somber silence. They realized that the tragic teenager didn't know she was dead. Her sudden, violent end had left her spirit wandering the halls of the morgue, a lost soul just desperately trying to find her way back home.